The thunder rolled across the Montana sky as Quentin Colt stood in the doorway of Red Bluff's only church, staring at the woman huddled on the steps, her cloak drenched from the downpour, her hands protectively cradling the unmistakable swell of her belly. The year was 1876, and Reverend Colt hadn't expected visitors on this stormy April night, especially not one who would change his life forever. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I have nowhere else to go." The flicker of the oil lamp cast shadows across her face, revealing features both delicate and determined. Her eyes, though filled with fear, held a quiet dignity that stirred something in Quentin's heart, something he thought had died 3 years ago when he buried his wife and infant son. "Come inside, madam," he said, extending a calloused hand. "This is God's house. You'll find shelter here." She hesitated, searching his face for signs of judgment or malice, then took his hand. As she rose, the light caught the gold of her wedding band, but Quentin knew from her desperation that whatever marriage it represented offered no protection now. "I'm Reverend Quentin Colt," he said, guiding her through the threshold into the modest sanctuary. "And this is Red Bluff's first church." "Willow," she replied, her voice steadier now. "Willow Foster." The name suited her. There was a bendable strength about her, like the tree she was named for. Quentin noticed how she swayed slightly on her feet, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "When was the last time you ate, Mrs. Foster?" "It's Miss," she corrected quickly, then looked away. "I wear the ring to avoid questions, and I don't remember. Yesterday, perhaps." Quentin nodded, asking no further questions. "My quarters are behind the church. Nothing fancy, but there's a warm stove and food. Can you walk a bit further?" She nodded, clutching her small bundle of possessions closer. As they moved through the church toward the small parsonage attached to the back, Quentin was acutely aware of the scandal this arrangement might cause. A single pregnant woman staying with the widowed pastor would set tongues wagging by sunrise. But the alternative, turning her away, wasn't something he could bring himself to do, not with the memories that haunted him. The parsonage was modest but clean, a single main room with a potbelly stove, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to separate bedrooms, his own, and the small guest room he'd never had occasion to use. "Sit," he urged, pulling out a chair at the small wooden table. "I'll heat some stew." Willow lowered herself carefully into the chair, wincing slightly. Quentin pretended not to notice as he busied himself with the stove, adding wood until the fire blazed, then placing a pot of yesterday's stew over the heat. "You're the pastor here?" she asked, her eyes taking in the sparse furnishings, the bookshelf filled with theological texts, the Bible open on a small desk in the corner, the absence of feminine touches. 7 years now," Quentin replied, stirring the stew. "Though I reckon some folks wonder if I still deserve the title." "Why is that?" Quentin paused, considering how much to reveal. "Lost my way a bit, 3 years back. Some would say I haven't found it since." Understanding flickered in Willow's eyes, but she didn't pry. Instead, she looked down at her hands, still protectively curved around her middle. "I won't be a burden, Reverend. I can work, cook, clean, mend. I just need somewhere safe until the baby comes," he finished for her. "You're welcome here as long as you need, Miss Foster. No work required." "I insist," she said firmly. "I'm not looking for charity." Quentin nodded, recognizing the pride beneath her exhaustion. He set a bowl of steaming stew before her, along with a chunk of bread. "Eat first. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." As she ate, he observed her discreetly. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 to his 32, with auburn hair escaping from a once neat bun. Despite her condition and obvious fatigue, there was a grace to her movements, an education in her speech that told him she hadn't always lived hand to mouth. "Where did you come from?" he asked when she'd nearly finished her meal. She hesitated. Back east. Boston, originally. That's a long way to travel. Especially alone. I had little choice. Her voice hardened slightly. Some journeys choose us. Reverend Colt. Call me Quentin, he said. And you're right about that. I found life rarely consults us before appending our plans. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Then we understand each other. After she'd eaten, Quentin showed her to the small guest room. It was Spartan, just a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small washstand, but it was clean and private. It's not much, he apologized. It's perfect, she countered, genuine gratitude in her voice. Thank you, Quentin. Not many men would have. Get some rest, he said gently. Morning will be here before you know it. That night, lying in his own bed, Quentin stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. What had possessed him to take in a strange woman, a pregnant one, no less, with no questions asked? The logical part of him recognized the danger, the potential for scandal, the responsibility he'd just assumed. But another part, a part he'd thought long dead, had recognized something in Willow Foster's eyes, the same desperate prayer he'd uttered daily since burying Eliza and their son. Help me, please. I have nowhere else to turn. For the first time in 3 years, Quentin Colt closed his eyes and prayed, not out of duty or habit, but from a genuine need for guidance. Lord, he whispered into the darkness, I don't know what I'm doing, but I think maybe you do. Morning came with pale sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee already brewing. Quentin rose quickly, surprised to find Willow already up, her hair neatly pinned, wearing the same travel-worn dress but somehow looking more composed than the night before. I hope you don't mind, she said, gesturing to the stove where she'd not only made coffee but also had biscuits baking. I wanted to make myself useful. Not at all, he replied, taken aback by how domestic the scene felt, how long it had been since he'd shared a morning with anyone. Though you didn't have to. I told you, I intend to earn my keep. She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it to him. I noticed your pantry is rather sparse. Quentin accepted the cup with a rueful smile. Cooking for one seems pointless most days. Well, you're cooking for 2 now. 3, technically, she added, placing a hand on her belly. How far along are you? He asked, realizing he should probably know if he was going to be housing her. Nearly 7 months, I think, she answered, turning to check the biscuits. And the father? The question came before he could stop himself. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. Not in the picture. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. No, it's fair. She turned back to face him, her expression resolute. You've taken me into your home. You deserve some truth. He was my employer in St. Louis. A widower with 2 children. I was their governess. He promised many things. Marriage, respectability. When I told him about the baby, he gave me $300 and told me to disappear. She lifted her chin. So I did. Quentin felt a surge of anger toward the unknown man. Why Red Bluff? It's hardly on the way to anywhere. The train fare was what I could afford, she admitted. And I hoped a smaller town might be more forgiving, or at least less likely to have connections to my past. I planned to find work, but she gestured to her condition. Few are willing to hire a woman in my state. Quentin nodded, understanding the cruel logic of her situation. Unmarried and pregnant, she'd be seen as fallen, immoral regardless of the circumstances. Most respectable households wouldn't employ her, most lodging houses wouldn't accept her. Well, you're welcome to stay here as long as needed, he said. But I should warn you, the town will talk. There's no avoiding it. Let them, she said with surprising fierceness. I've heard worse. After breakfast, Quentin explained that Sundays were his busiest day, with services in the morning and often visits to shut-ins or the sick in the afternoon. "I'll stay out of sight," Willow offered. "I understand my presence could complicate things for you." "No," Quentin said firmly. "This is your home now, temporary as it might be. I won't have you hiding away. In fact," he considered for a moment, "perhaps you'd like to attend the service? Might as well meet the town head-on." Willow looked uncertain. "Are you sure? I don't want to damage your standing in the community." "My standing?" Quentin laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Miss Foster, half the town already thinks I'm a poor excuse for a pastor. The other half comes to services out of habit more than spiritual hunger. I haven't given a sermon that moved anyone, including myself, in 3 years." "What happened 3 years ago?" she asked quietly. Quentin's face closed off. "I should prepare for the service. Feel free to join if you'd like, but no pressure." To his surprise, Willow did attend, slipping into the back pew just as the service began. She wore the same dress but had added a shawl that partially concealed her condition, though not entirely. Whispers immediately rippled through the congregation, and Quentin saw Mrs. Henderson, the most notorious gossip in Red Bluff, lean over to whisper urgently to her neighbor. Quentin's sermons had grown perfunctory over the years, short, theologically sound, but delivered with all the passion of a grocery list. Today, however, seeing Willow's vulnerable yet dignified presence in the back pew stirred something in him. He found himself speaking about mercy, about judgment, about how Christ himself chose to associate with those society deemed unworthy. "We are quick to cast stones," he said, his voice gaining strength as he went, "but slow to extend a hand, quick to judge circumstances we don't understand, but slow to remember that each of us stands in need of grace." Every day, several congregants shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others looked thoughtful. Mrs. Henderson simply looked scandalized, especially when Quentin concluded by saying, "We have a newcomer to Red Bluff joining us today. I hope you'll all make Miss Foster feel welcome, as Christ would welcome any weary traveler seeking refuge." After the service, Quentin stood at the door as usual, shaking hands with departing parishioners. Some avoided his eyes. Others gave him pointed looks. A few, to his surprise, seemed genuinely moved by his words. Mrs. Henderson paused at the door, her thin lips pursed. "Reverend Colt, I must say I find it most unusual that you would harbor an unmarried woman in your home. What will people think?" "They'll think what they choose to, Mrs. Henderson," Quentin replied evenly. "Just as God will judge us all by the mercy we show others." She huffed and moved on, but not before Quentin caught the slight flush in her cheeks. To his surprise, several members of the congregation approached Willow, introducing themselves. Martha Jenkins, the widow who ran the general store, was particularly friendly, patting Willow's hand and speaking to her at length. From across the church, Quentin couldn't hear their conversation, but he saw Willow's face brighten with relief. Later, as they walked back to the parsonage, Willow seemed thoughtful. "Your sermon was beautiful," she said finally, "though I suspect it wasn't your usual fare." Quentin felt his ears redden slightly. "No, it wasn't. Mrs. Jenkins offered me work," Willow continued. "Nothing strenuous, just bookkeeping and inventory at her store. She said I could sit most of the day." "Martha's a good woman," Quentin nodded. "Lost her husband in the war. Runs that store better than he ever did, truth be told." "She also said," Willow hesitated, "that you haven't always been so reserved. That you used to be known for your passionate preaching, your involvement in the community. Before your family." Quentin stopped walking. "Martha talks too much. She speaks highly of you," Willow said softly. "She said the whole town mourned with you, but no one knew how to reach you afterward." There was nothing to reach, Quentin said flatly. Let's drop the subject. But that evening, as they sat by the stove after a simple dinner, Willow returned to it. I lost someone too, she said quietly. My mother, when I was 16. Consumption. I watched her waste away for months. Quentin said nothing, staring into the flames of the stove. I was so angry with God, Willow continued. I'd prayed every day for a miracle. When she died anyway, I stopped praying. Stopped believing. What changed? Quentin asked despite himself. Time partly, she admitted, and eventually understanding that faith isn't a bargain we make with God. It's trusting that whatever happens, we're not alone in it. She looked at him directly. You still believe, don't you? Even though you're angry. Quentin met her gaze. I never stopped believing. That's the worst part. I believe in a God who could have saved them but didn't. And yet you still preach. Still serve. It's all I know how to do, he said simply. Willow nodded, understanding in her eyes. Thank you for sharing your home with me, Quentin, and for standing by me today. Not many would have done the same. Perhaps I'm not as good a man as you think, he replied. Perhaps I took you in to ease my own conscience, not out of true charity. Does the reason matter if the deed is kind? She countered. That question lingered with Quentin long after Willow had gone to bed. He sat by the dying embers of the stove, Bible open on his lap to a passage he'd avoided for 3 years. The story of Job, a righteous man who lost everything. The days settled into a routine. Willow began working at Martha's store 4 days a week, earning a small but steady wage that she insisted on contributing toward household expenses despite Quentin's protests. On her days off, she transformed the parsonage, making curtains from fabric Martha had given her, planting a small kitchen garden behind the church, cooking meals that reminded Quentin of what a home could feel like. The town's reaction was mixed. Some, like Martha, accepted Willow without question. Others maintained a cool distance. Mrs. Henderson and her circle made their disapproval known through pointed remarks and conspicuous absences from Sunday services. But to Quentin's surprise, attendance overall began to increase. His sermons, inspired partly by his ongoing conversations with Willow, had regained some of their former passion. One evening in late May, as they sat on the small porch behind the parsonage watching the sunset, Willow winced suddenly, placing a hand on her belly. Are you all right? Quentin asked, alarmed. Yes, she smiled reassuringly. Just active tonight. Would you like to feel? The question caught him off guard. It seemed incredibly intimate, yet the look in her eyes held no guile, only a simple desire to share this moment with someone who cared. Hesitantly, he extended his hand. She took it and placed it gently on the side of her belly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he felt it, a distinct movement, a small but determined push against his palm. That's remarkable, he whispered, unexpectedly moved. I talk to the baby about you sometimes, Willow admitted, her cheeks coloring slightly in the fading light. About how kind you've been to us. Quentin withdrew his hand slowly. I haven't done much. You've done everything, she countered. You gave us a home when we had none. You stood by us publicly when it would have been easier to hide me away. You've never once made me feel shameful or less than. No one should make you feel that way, he said firmly. Willow smiled sadly. The world doesn't always share your view, Quentin. The world is wrong, he replied, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. As May turned to June, Willow's condition became more pronounced. Dr. Wilson, Red Bluff's aging physician, began making weekly visits to the parsonage, declaring her healthy but advising rest as her time approached. First babies often come late, he assured them both. But best to be prepared. Any day now, I'd say. The prospect of the birth made Quentin increasingly anxious. The memory of Eliza's difficult labor, ending in both her death and their son's, haunted him anew. He found himself checking on Willow during the night, listening for any sound of distress from her room. One evening, returning from visiting a sick parishioner, Quentin found Sheriff Miller waiting on the church steps, his expression grave. "Evening, Reverend," he said, standing as Quentin approached. "Got a moment?" "Of course, Tom. Something wrong?" "Depends on your definition of wrong," the sheriff replied. "Got a telegram from St. Louis today. Seems someone's looking for a woman matching Miss Foster's description. A Mr. James Harrington says she was employed by him and absconded with valuable property." Quentin felt his stomach tighten. "That's ridiculous. She took nothing but what was rightfully hers." Sheriff Miller raised an eyebrow. "So you know her story?" "I know enough," Quentin said firmly. "Whatever this man claims, Willow Foster is an honest woman who was wronged." "Be that as it may," the sheriff said. "If he comes looking for her or for his property, it becomes a legal matter." "His property?" Quentin repeated, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "You mean his child?" "The one he paid her to disappear with." The sheriff had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm just giving you fair warning, Quentin. This could get messy." After the sheriff left, Quentin stood for a long time on the church steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The peaceful beauty seemed at odds with the turmoil within him. The thought of Willow being forced to face the man who had abandoned her filled him with a protective rage he hadn't experienced in years. When he finally entered the parsonage, he found Willow at the table, a piece of paper in her hands, her face pale. "Martha brought this from the store," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's from him." Quentin took the telegram she held out. "Found you stop arriving Red Bluff June 15th stop, prepared to be generous if discreet stop JH. He wants to buy my silence," Willow said, her voice hollow. "So his reputation won't be tarnished." Quentin crumpled the telegram in his fist. "You don't have to see him. You don't owe him anything." "Don't I?" She looked up at him, anguish in her eyes. "This is his child too. What right do I have to keep them apart?" "The same right he claimed when he sent you away." Quentin's voice rose with emotion. "He made his choice, Willow. He chose his reputation over you, over his own child." "Perhaps he's changed his mind," she said weakly. "Perhaps he wants to make amends." "By offering money for discretion?" Quentin shook his head in disgust. "That's not amends, Willow. That's continuing to treat you as a problem to be solved, not as the remarkable woman you are." Willow's eyes widened slightly at his words, and Quentin realized he'd said more than he intended. But it was true somewhere along the line. His admiration for her courage had deepened into something more, something he had no right to feel. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "It's your decision, of course. I don't want to see you hurt again." Willow rose from the table with difficulty, her hand supporting her lower back. "I need to think, and I'm very tired." "Of course." Quentin stepped aside to let her pass. As she reached her bedroom door, he added, "Whatever you decide, Willow, I'll support you. Just, please don't leave without saying goodbye." She paused, her back to him. "I would never do that to you, Quentin," she said softly, then closed the door behind her. That night, Quentin couldn't sleep. The thought of Willow leaving, returning to the man who had betrayed her, or simply disappearing again, was unbearable. Yet what claim did he have on her? What right to ask her to stay? He'd offered shelter, nothing more. That their arrangement had come to feel like something else, something dangerously close to family, was his own weakness, not her obligation. Around midnight, a muffled cry from Willow's room sent him bolting from bed. He knocked softly on her door. "Willow?" Are you all right? I think. Her voice was strained. I think the baby's coming. Quentin's heart raced with fear and adrenaline. I'll fetch Dr. Wilson. No time, she gasped. It's happening too fast. Please. I need help. Taking a deep breath, Quentin entered her room. Willow was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face contorted in pain, her nightgown damp with sweat. I'll boil water, he said, forcing calm into his voice, and get clean linens. Quentin! She caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. I'm scared. He covered her hand with his own. I know, but you're not alone. I promise. The next hours were a blur of fear and desperate prayer. Quentin helped Willow walk when she needed to move, supported her back when the pains grew intense, held her hands when she needed to push. He pushed aside his own traumatic memories of Eliza's labor, focusing solely on Willow and her needs. Just before dawn, with a final cry of effort from Willow, a new sound filled the small room, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. A boy, Quentin announced, his voice thick with emotion as he caught the slippery infant in a clean towel. A perfect baby boy. Willow reached for her son with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. Hello, little one, she whispered. Look at you, so strong already. Quentin helped clean the baby and swaddle him in a soft blanket, then did his best to make Willow comfortable. When she and the infant were both settled, he hesitated at the bedside, suddenly aware of the intimacy they had just shared. I should go fetch the doctor now, he said. Make sure you're both well. Willow caught his hand before he could leave. Thank you, she said, her eyes bright with tears. I couldn't have done this without you. Impulsively, Quentin bent and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Willow Foster. Rest now. I'll be back soon. Dr. Wilson pronounced both mother and child healthy, though he scolded Quentin for not fetching him sooner. Martha Jenkins arrived shortly after with a basket of baby clothes and food for the new mother, cooing over the infant with unabashed delight. What will you name him? She asked Willow. Willow glanced at Quentin, who stood awkwardly in the doorway. I was thinking, Samuel. It means God has heard. Samuel Foster, Martha nodded approvingly. A fine, strong name. Samuel Colt Foster, Willow corrected softly, for the man who helped bring him into the world. Quentin felt his throat tighten with emotion. Willow, you don't have to. I want to, she interrupted gently. If you'll allow it. He could only nod, words failing him entirely. The news of Samuel's birth spread quickly through Red Bluff. To Quentin's surprise, many of the townspeople stopped by with gifts and well wishes, even those who had previously kept their distance. Mrs. Henderson herself appeared with a hand-knitted blanket, though she sniffed disapprovingly at the baby's middle name. Rather presumptuous, she murmured to her companion, loud enough for Quentin to overhear, as if claiming some sort of right to the child. But such voices were increasingly in the minority. Something about the baby's arrival had softened the town's attitude toward Willow and toward Quentin himself. Sunday services were now fully attended, with many staying afterward to inquire about the new mother and child. As for Willow, she bloomed in motherhood. The shadows that had haunted her eyes when she first arrived began to fade, replaced by a quiet joy as she nursed her son, sang to him, introduced him to the world outside their windows. But June 15th loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. Quentin found himself watching the stagecoach arrivals each day, his stomach knotting at the sight of any well-dressed stranger. Willow, too, grew increasingly tense as the date approached, jumping at small noises, her eyes darting to the door whenever footsteps passed on the street outside. On the morning of the 15th, Quentin woke early and dressed with unusual care. If James Harrington was coming, Quentin intended to meet him as an equal, not as the disheveled, half-present man he'd been for so long. "You look nice," Willow commented when he emerged from his room, Samuel nursing contentedly in her arms. "Are you expecting someone?" Quentin hesitated, then decided on honesty. "If Harrington arrives today, I want to be ready." "To do what?" she asked, concern creasing her brow. "To support whatever decision you make," he said carefully, "but also to make sure he understands that you and Samuel are under my protection now. Whatever happens, he doesn't get to dictate terms anymore." Willow's eyes widened slightly. "Quentin, you don't have to." "I do," he interrupted gently. They both froze, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. The moment of truth had arrived. Quentin opened the door to find a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit standing on the church steps. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, and he carried himself with the confident air of someone accustomed to authority. "Reverend Colt, I presume?" he said, extending a hand. "James Harrington. I believe you're expecting me." Quentin shook the man's hand briefly, noting the firm grip, the manicured nails, the gold signet ring. "Mr. Harrington." "Yes, we received your telegram. May I come in?" Harrington asked, his tone making it clear he expected compliance. "That depends," Quentin replied evenly, "on your intentions toward Miss Foster and her child." Harrington's expression hardened slightly. "I believe that's a private matter between Willow and myself." "Not anymore," Quentin countered. "She's part of this community now, part of this church. What affects her affects us all." For a moment, the two men stared at each other, measuring. Then Harrington's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I assure you, Reverend, I mean no harm. I simply wish to resolve a difficult situation in a manner that benefits all parties." After a moment's consideration, Quentin stepped aside, allowing Harrington to enter the church. He led him not to the parsonage but to the front pew, indicating that Harrington should sit. "I'll inform Miss Foster you're here," Quentin said. "Whether she wishes to see you is her decision alone." When he returned to the parsonage, Willow was standing by the window, Samuel now sleeping in his cradle nearby. She had changed into her best dress, the one she wore to church on Sundays, and had pinned her hair neatly. "He's here?" she asked, though she clearly knew the answer. Quentin nodded. "In the church. I told him it's your choice whether to see him." Willow took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I need to face him, to finish this one way or another." She glanced at the sleeping baby. "Will you stay with Samuel?" I'd rather not bring him yet." "Of course," Quentin assured her. "Take all the time you need." As Willow moved toward the door, he added, "Remember, you hold the power now, Willow, not him." She gave him a grateful look, then straightened her spine and walked out toward the church. Quentin sat beside the cradle, watching Samuel's peaceful face as he slept, marveling at the perfect tiny features that somehow combined Willow's delicacy with something entirely his own. What kind of man would father such a miracle and then try to erase its existence? The thought filled him with a quiet anger. Time stretched on. Through the open window, Quentin could occasionally hear raised voices from the church, though he couldn't make out the words. Once, he was certain he heard Willow cry out in what sounded like outrage. He tensed, ready to intervene, but forced himself to remain where he was. This was Willow's battle to fight. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the church door opened and closed. Footsteps a single set crunched on the gravel path that led to the road, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Then the door between the church and parsonage opened, and Willow appeared. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes clear and determined. Without a word, she crossed to the cradle and checked on Samuel, who still slept soundly. Then she sat heavily in the chair opposite Quentin. "He's gone," she said simply. "For good?" Quentin asked. Willow nodded. "He offered me $5,000 if I would sign papers relinquishing any claim on him, legally declaring Samuel wasn't his child." Quentin's jaw tightened. I refused." Willow interrupted. "I told him I didn't want his money. I didn't want anything from him except acknowledgement of his son. And—" a small, bitter smile crossed Willow's face. "He said that was impossible. That it would ruin him, his business, his standing in society, his children's future. He begged me to be reasonable." "What did you say?" Quentin asked, already proud of her regardless of her answer. "I told him I've never been more reasonable in my life," she replied, a new strength in her voice. "I told him that one day, when Samuel asks about his father, I'll tell him the truth, that his father was a coward who chose appearances over love, and that I chose differently." Quentin reached across the space between them and took her hand. "You're extraordinary, Willow Foster." She squeezed his hand, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "He asked who you were to me, what our arrangement was. What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you took in two strangers in need, expecting nothing in return. That you've been more of a father to Samuel in 4 days than James Harrington would have been in a lifetime." Quentin's heart swelled at her words, even as he recognized the bittersweet truth in them. He'd grown to love this child, this woman, but they weren't his to claim. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Willow looked at him steadily. "That depends partly on you, Quentin. When I came here, I was running away. But now—" she glanced at Samuel, then back to Quentin. "Now I find myself wanting to stay, to build something here, a life, a home. But I wouldn't want to complicate your position in the community. The community has adapted remarkably well to your presence," Quentin pointed out. "Even Mrs. Henderson seems to have softened." "Yes, as a poor unwed mother you've charitably taken in," Willow said carefully. "But that's not all I want to be. Not forever." Quentin felt his pulse quicken as understanding dawned. "What do you want to be, Willow?" She met his eyes directly, courage in every line of her face. "Happy, loved, a partner to someone who sees me clearly and chooses me anyway." "Someone like me?" he asked, hardly daring to believe. "Exactly like you," she whispered. "If that's something you might want too." In answer, Quentin rose from his chair and knelt before her, still holding her hand in his. "When you appeared on my doorstep that night, I thought I was offering shelter to someone in need. I didn't realize you would be sheltering me too from the loneliness, the bitterness I'd wrapped around myself like armor." Willow's free hand came up to touch his face gently. "We saved each other, I think." "I love you, Willow Foster," Quentin said, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. "You and Samuel both. I want to be a family, a real family, if you'll have me." "Are you proposing, Reverend Colt?" she asked, a teasing light entering her eyes even as tears spilled onto her cheeks. "Inelegantly, but yes," he laughed softly. "Though perhaps we should wait a decent interval, for propriety's sake." Willow shook her head firmly. "I've had enough of propriety, enough of caring what others think. Life is too short and too precious to waste on appearances." "Then marry me," Quentin said, his voice growing stronger with certainty. "Not next month or next year, but as soon as you're willing." "Yes," she answered simply, leaning forward to press her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in the very church where they had first met. Martha Jenkins stood as Willow's witness, beaming with approval, while Sheriff Miller, who had become an unexpected ally, stood for Quentin. Samuel, dressed in a christening gown Martha had sewn, was officially baptized immediately after the wedding ceremony. with both Quentin and Willow named as his parents on the church register. Mrs. Henderson sniffed that it was indecently hasty, but she attended both ceremonies nonetheless, and was seen dabbing at her eyes during the vows. That evening, as they sat together on the porch of what was now truly their home, Samuel sleeping peacefully in Willow's arms, Quentin felt a sense of completeness he had thought lost forever. "I've been thinking," Willow said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about names." "Samuel's perfect as it is," Quentin replied, confused. "Not his name. Ours." She looked at him seriously. "I love being Willow Colt." Quentin's sermons, once perfunctory exercises in theological correctness, became vibrant explorations of faith tested by fire and reforged stronger. The congregation grew, drawn not just by his words but by the visible evidence of his renewed faith, the joy that radiated from him as he baptized new members, counseled troubled marriages, comforted the bereaved. Willow, meanwhile, continued working at Martha's store, bringing Samuel with her in a basket where he charmed customers with his ready smile and bright eyes. As he grew from infant to toddler, he became a fixture in Red Bluff, toddling down the main street holding his parents' hands, attending church services where he sometimes interrupted his father's sermons with enthusiastic babbling. By the time Samuel was 2, Red Bluff had all but forgotten that Willow had arrived as a desperate stranger on the church steps. She was simply Mrs. Colt now, the pastor's wife, respected for her intelligence, her kindness, and her excellent apple pies at church socials. And if anyone new to town ever questioned the slight discrepancy in timing between the Colts' wedding and their son's birth, they were swiftly hushed by Mrs. Henderson herself, who had become one of the family's staunchest defenders. "Some things," she would say with uncharacteristic discretion, "are between a family and the good Lord above, and the Colts are as fine a family as you'll find in all of Montana Territory." On Samuel's 3rd birthday, as they celebrated with a small gathering of close friends in the parsonage yard, Willow pulled Quentin aside, her eyes bright with a secret. "I have news," she whispered, taking his hands in hers. "Good news, I hope." Quentin looked at her quizzically. "What is it?" "Samuel's going to be a big brother," she said, a smile blooming across her face. "In about 7 months." Joy surged through Quentin, so powerful it nearly took his breath away. "Are you sure?" Willow nodded, laughing at his expression. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. Are you happy?" In answer, Quentin swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughingly protested that he'd make her dizzy. Samuel, seeing his parents' celebration, ran over to join in, and Quentin scooped him up too, holding his family close. "Thank you," he whispered against Willow's hair. "For what?" "For stumbling onto my church steps that night. For trusting me when you had no reason to. For giving me a second chance at love, at faith, at everything that matters." Willow leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder as Samuel squirmed between them. "God works in mysterious ways," she said simply. Later that night, after Samuel was asleep and they were preparing for bed, Quentin found Willow standing by the window, gazing out at the stars that dotted the vast Montana sky. "What are you thinking?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "About how far we've come," she replied. "About how different our lives might have been if I'd stepped off that train in any other town, or if anyone else had been pastor here. I used to question God's plan," Quentin admitted, slipping an arm around her waist. "Why he took Eliza and our son. Why he seemed to abandon me in my grief. Now I wonder if perhaps he was preparing a place in my heart for you all along." Willow turned in his embrace, looking up at him with eyes full of understanding. "I think perhaps he was preparing both of us, teaching us strength through suffering, compassion through loss, making us ready to recognize each other when the time came." Quentin pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. When did you become so wise, Mrs. Colt? I've had an excellent teacher, Reverend, she teased, rising on tiptoes to meet his lips with her own. Their second child, a daughter they named Hope Elizabeth Colt, was born the following spring, entering the world with considerably less drama than her brother had. Delivered safely by Dr. Wilson in their home with Martha Jenkins assisting. Samuel, initially suspicious of the small, red-faced intruder who demanded so much of his mother's attention, soon became her most devoted guardian, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bedtime stories. The parsonage, once a lonely bachelor's quarters, transformed again to accommodate their growing family. Quentin added a room to the back of the house, learning carpentry from one of his parishioners. Willow planted a larger garden, preserving its bounty for winter, filling their cellar with jars of vegetables, fruits, and jams. By the time Hope was walking, Samuel was ready for school, proudly carrying his slate and primer to the one-room schoolhouse on the edge of town. Willow sometimes assisted the teacher, Miss Parker, with the younger children, her natural gift for education making her a favorite among the students. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Quentin was working on his sermon in the quiet church, the door opened to reveal a familiar figure, Sheriff Miller, looking unusually grave. "Tom," Quentin greeted him, setting aside his notes. "What brings you here on a Wednesday?" "Got something for you," the sheriff said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Telegram came from St. Louis yesterday. Wasn't sure if I should bring it, but, well, you should probably see it." Quentin took the envelope with a sense of foreboding. Only one person from St. Louis had any connection to Red Bluff. He opened it and read the brief message inside. "James Harrington, deceased, stop, will name Samuel C. Foster Colt, beneficiary, stop, lawyer, requests meeting, stop." "When did this arrive?" Quentin asked, his mind racing. "Yesterday," Sheriff Miller admitted. "I held it back. Wanted to make sure it wasn't some kind of trick. Wired the St. Louis authorities to confirm. It's legitimate, Quentin. Harrington died 3 weeks ago. Influenza." Quentin nodded slowly. "Thank you, Tom. I need to discuss this with Willow." After the sheriff left, Quentin sat in the empty church for a long time, the telegram clutched in his hand. How would Willow react to this news? Would it reopen old wounds? And what did it mean for Samuel, who had never known his biological father, who had called Quentin Papa from his first words? That evening, after the children were asleep, Quentin showed Willow the telegram. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. "Are you all right?" he asked when she finally looked up. "Yes," she said, sounding surprised at her own answer. I'm not sure what I feel. Sad for the man he might have been. Sad for his other children. But not sad for us." "What do you want to do about this?" Quentin asked. "About the will?" Willow considered for a moment. "I think we should meet with the lawyer. Hear what he has to say. Whatever James left for Samuel, it's his right to have it, even if his father acknowledged him too late." "And when Samuel is old enough to understand?" Quentin pressed gently. "What will we tell him?" "The truth," Willow said firmly. "That he has always been loved. That family is more than blood, it's choice, commitment, daily acts of love. That you chose to be his father in all the ways that truly matter." She reached across the table and took Quentin's hand. "And that sometimes God's greatest blessings come disguised as our greatest challenges." 2 weeks later, they met with Mr. Harrington's lawyer in Helena. The bequest was substantial, $20,000, to be held in trust until Samuel's 21st birthday, with additional provisions for educational expenses before then. There was also a letter, sealed, to be given to Samuel when he was old enough to understand its contents. "Mr. Harrington amended his will last year," the lawyer explained. "He never publicly acknowledged Samuel, but in private. Well, I believe he regretted his actions in the end. On the train ride back to Red Bluff, Willow was quiet, gazing out the window at the passing landscape. Quentin sat beside her, their hands intertwined. "What are you thinking?" he asked eventually. "That money would have meant everything to me once," she replied. "When I was desperate and alone. Now it seems almost incidental. Important for Samuel's future, yes, but not for his happiness. Not for what truly matters." Quentin squeezed her hand. "You've given him what truly matters. A home, family, love without conditions." "We both have," she corrected softly. "From the moment you opened your door that night." When they returned to Red Bluff, life resumed its peaceful rhythm. They decided to say nothing about the inheritance to Samuel until he was older, though they did open an account at the bank in Helena for his future education. The sealed letter they placed in Quentin's study drawer, a bridge to a past that would someday need crossing, but not yet. The years passed in the way that years do when filled with the everyday miracles of family life. Samuel losing his first tooth, Hope saying her first word, book, to her mother's delight, the Christmas pageants and summer picnics, the minor illnesses and major milestones that weave the tapestry of a shared life. By the time Samuel was 10 and Hope 7, the Colts had added another member to their family, Joshua Quentin Colt, born on a snowy February night, his lusty cries announcing his arrival to the entire household. Samuel, now old enough to understand more of the circumstances of his own birth, had asked questions that Quentin and Willow answered honestly but gently, always emphasizing that family was about love, not merely biology. "So you're not my real father?" Samuel had asked Quentin directly, his young face serious. "I'm not your biological father," Quentin corrected carefully, "but I am your real father in every way that matters. I've loved you since before you were born, since the night your mother appeared on our church steps. You're my son, Samuel. Nothing will ever change that." Samuel had considered this, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "I'm glad it was our church she found," he said simply, before running off to join his friends in a game of tag. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Quentin surprised Willow with a gift, the deed to a small piece of land on the outskirts of Red Bluff, with a view of the mountains to the west and the plains to the east. "What's this for?" she asked, examining the document with confusion. "Our future," he explained. "The parsonage has served us well, but with 3 children now, we could use more space. I thought perhaps we might build a proper home of our own." Willow looked up at him in surprise. "But the church will still be there," he assured her. "I've spoken with the elders. They've agreed it's time for the pastor to have a separate residence. The parsonage can be used for church functions, guest quarters when needed." Tears welled in Willow's eyes. "Our own home," she said wonderingly. "After all this time, it still sometimes feels like a dream that I get to have this life, this family. That I found you that night." "That we found each other," Quentin corrected gently, drawing her into his arms, "and build a little more of our dream every day." The new house took nearly a year to complete, with Quentin working alongside the town's carpenter and various parishioners who volunteered their skills. Samuel, eager to be involved, learned to hammer nails and plane wood, his young face serious with concentration as he helped create his family's new home. When it was finally finished, a sprawling, comfortable 2-story house with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, the entire town turned out for a housewarming celebration. Even Mrs. Henderson, now walking with a cane but still formidable in her opinions, declared it a home worthy of Red Bluff's finest family. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep in their new rooms, Quentin and Willow stood on the porch, arms around each other, gazing up at the same stars that had witnessed their beginning 10 years before. "Did you ever imagine," Willow asked softly, "that night when I appeared on your doorstep, that we would end up here?" "Never," Quentin admitted. I was just trying to get through each day then, going through the motions of living without really being alive. You changed everything, Willow. You brought me back to life. We brought each other back, she corrected, leaning into his embrace. From fear, from loneliness, from doubt. Quentin turned her in his arms so she faced him, the moonlight silvering her hair, still beautiful to him after all these years. Do you remember what you said that first night in the parsonage? About faith not being a bargain we make with God, but trusting that whatever happens, we're not alone in it. Willow nodded, her eyes soft with memory. I didn't understand then, Quentin continued. I thought faith was about getting what you pray for. It took losing everything I thought I needed to be open to receiving what I truly needed. He brushed a strand of hair from her face tenderly. You, our children, this life we've built. The best sermons, Willow said with a smile, are the ones we live, not just the ones we preach. As if in answer to her words, a cry came from inside the house. Little Joshua, perhaps waking from a dream in his unfamiliar room. Without hesitation, they both turned toward the sound, toward their son who needed them, toward the life they had chosen together on a stormy night when faith and love had found them both on the steps of a small church in Red Bluff, Montana. In the years that followed, the Colt family became a cornerstone of Red Bluff society. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young man who eventually attended college in Denver, studying law with the help of his trust fund. When he returned to Red Bluff, he opened the town's first proper law office, becoming known for his fairness and integrity qualities his parents had instilled in him from childhood. Hope, with her mother's gift for education and her father's passion for helping others, became a teacher, eventually taking over from Miss Parker when she retired. Under Hope's guidance, the school expanded to 2 rooms, then 3, as Red Bluff grew with the railroad's influence. Joshua, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for medicine. After apprenticing with Dr. Wilson, he went east to medical school, returning as the old doctor's partner and eventual successor. And through it all, Quentin and Willow remained the heart of the community, he still preaching at the church that had been his sanctuary, she working alongside him, their partnership a living testament to the power of forgiveness, second chances, and faith restored. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes reminisce about that stormy night when a desperate young woman had sought refuge on a church's steps, and a broken man had found the courage to open not just his door, but his heart. Neither could have imagined then the life that would unfold from that single moment of trust, the family they would build, the community they would strengthen, the love that would sustain them through every joy and sorrow. God's greatest miracles, Quentin would often say in his sermons, aren't the dramatic parting of seas or the turning of water into wine. They are the quiet transformations of the human heart from despair to hope, from isolation to connection, from brokenness to wholeness. And in the front pew, Willow would smile, knowing that they were living proof of those very words, 2 wounded souls who had found healing in each other, and in so doing, had helped heal a community around them. Their love story, which began in desperation on those church steps, became a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of second chances, and the enduring miracle of faith reborn through love, a legacy that would echo through Red Bluff for generations to come.